as factional politics. It's never necessarily thought that when the Pakistani president says one thing, that all the factions within the government are necessarily behind him. Is the government united in General Musharraf's stand? Is indeed the Inter-Services Intelligence Organization, which has long been a very important factor in Pakistani government, whether admitted, whether overt or covert, is that actually behind fighting terrorism, as it's called, and fighting the Taliban?
First of all, there is no difference whatsoever within the government of Pakistan. The President of Pakistan has had very close consultations with all segments of opinion, also political and religious opinion in the country. Yesterday, he spent 14 hours with more than 100 political and religious personalities in the country. And I can tell you that while there are differences at the political level in regard to precise policies, there is no difference on broad outline of policy. Firstly, all the people, political, religious leaders, have unanimously condemned the acts of terrorism. They have pointed out that Islam does not permit attacks on innocent people. They have also pointed out that Islam, a religion of peace, abhors acts of terrorism. As for precise policies, there is naturally some difference of opinion, but as I've said, on broad lines, Pakistan must be seen and must participate in implementation of the resolutions calling for the fight against international terrorism.
But to put it on the line, though, Mr. Sattar, will Pakistan support a military strike on Afghanistan if that's what the Pentagon chooses to do?
Well, we have to wait to hear the plan, and only then can the government of President Musharraf make final decisions. I cannot deal with, as you know, such contingencies without knowing what precisely are the plans.
You mentioned that Islam is not a religion of war, it's a peaceful religion, that the people who carried out these attacks do not represent Islam as a religion. Nonetheless, there has been a certain amount of understanding expressed in Pakistan, even as people are disgusted and horrified by the attack in New York, as to why the United States might have been targeted. Now, this is something that's quite mystifying to many in the United States, and we have many viewers in the United States watching right now, as well as our international audience. Do you think you could explain why, when our correspondents went into Pakistan, into various cities in Pakistan, that there was some sense of understanding as to why the attacks took place? Explain that to our American audience.
For a long period of time, there have been sentiments in the country that in many areas of the world, power is being used, force is being used unjustly. And the sense of justice and of conformity with principles of international law is very strong among Muslim people. And therefore, when they see violations of human rights and of use of state terrorism in parts of the world, they naturally react with sympathy for the innocent victims of these acts. Now, there is a very clear recognition in Pakistan about the gravity of the situation in the wake of this catastrophe in New York and Washington. All political leaders the President consulted yesterday, all leaders of religious parties who met him, were unanimous in the view that Pakistan must act in conformity with principles of international law and justice, that Pakistan must implement the resolutions of the Security Council that I have already mentioned. I think you can expect that in the days ahead, all the religious and political leaders who have met with the President will play their role to ensure that our people understand fully the grave situation that has arisen and will endorse the policy of Pakistan in favor of implementation of principles of international law and justice.
Nonetheless, Islamic groups across Pakistan have said that if Pakistan continues to support some sort of coalition against Afghanistan or against terrorism, or is seen to be supporting some sort of war on the Islamic world, they're going to cause a lot of trouble. They're going to actually try and overthrow General Musharraf's regime. How serious do you think that threat is?
Well, as I've said, first of all, there is a very broad consensus in Pakistan. If there are groups who have other opinions, they have to act within the confines of law obtaining in Pakistan. The government of Pakistan will have to deal with any attempts to violate the law. Now, let me also endorse the point you have made. The government of Pakistan will face a difficult situation at home. Our friends in the United States and the world know about it. We hope they will also recognize it in their expectations of Pakistan.
With respect to Foreign Minister, with respect
to the determination.
If the government's main defense is the rule of law, of course the government came into power with a military coup, which wasn't, of course, in the realms of Pakistani law. Is that, I mean, how can the government rely on the law in Pakistan if its own legitimacy is in question because it didn't come into power within the confines of the law?
I would be very happy to discuss with you the background to the events of October 12, 1999, but let me say two things. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has given a ruling that allows the President Musharraf's government to institute reforms and strengthen the foundations for sustainable democracy. 3 years have been allowed, and the government has already announced the roadmap for elections to take place in the first half of the month of October in 2002. I think that issue is basically resolved. I know
is it going to calm the people on the streets, though? Foreign Minister, is that going to calm the people on the streets? Can we, in fact expect General Musharraf to address the people of Pakistan to explain his position? Some have wondered why he hasn't done that already.
Well, the President of Pakistan has been working very hard over the last few days to, first of all, fully take into confidence opinion leaders in the country, in the government, outside the government. Secondly, he expects that as a result of the discussions that were held over nearly 14 hours yesterday with political and religious personalities, they would project their own understanding of what is good for Pakistan. Thirdly, the President of Pakistan intends today or tomorrow to address the nation, take them into confidence, explain to our people the gravity of the present situation and the need for responsible responses, not only on the part of the government, but also of the broad masses of the people.
Just very quickly, the President is going to travel to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, as well as China, but Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the only other two countries to recognize the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Are we going to see some united action? Are we going to see the cutting off of all recognition of the Taliban regime from the three of your powers?
The President has not yet scheduled these visits. Let me say we are in very close contact with the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Similarly, we are in close contact with our other friends, notably China, and we are also in the process of establishing close consultations with our other friends. So I think the news that you have seen that the President will be traveling to China today or tomorrow anticipates decisions in this respect.
All right, forgive me there, Foreign Minister, for jumping the gun then, but thank you very much for your time. And watching that interview with us was Major Garrett at the White House, and he already has some reaction to that interview. Major.
Well, not official reaction, Shiab, from the White House, but I can assure you that members of the Bush administration at the State Department and no doubt at the White House either were watching or will be soon going over the transcript word by word. It's a fascinating behind the scenes negotiations going on between the United States government and the Pakistani government. The Pakistani government has made it very clear, quite often through the good global offices of CNN, what it's looking for if it joins as robustly as it's promised to this U.S. coalition against global terrorism. It's looking for a couple of things. Lifting of economic sanctions against the country imposed by the U.S. Congress, signed by Bill Clinton after Pakistan tested a nuclear weapon in 1998, looking for an aid package, and also looking for U.S. assistance in resolving its ongoing dispute with the Indian government over Kashmir. The White House has not publicly committed to any of those issues. Internally, there's a good deal of resistance in dealing at all with the Kashmir dispute, but there is expressed privately a willingness to deal with the Pakistani government on the question of economic sanctions and economic aid, although the White House, at least publicly, is not acknowledging that. Also, Secretary of State Colin Powell said on Sunday that, in fact, a high-level State Department delegation will be traveling to Pakistan in the very near future. He told Wolf Blitzer that it has not been decided who will lead that delegation. I'm quoting the Secretary of State here. He appeared on Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer on Sunday, but I'm sure the Secretary of State said it will not be in the distant future. I would expect in the very near future, in the next several days. And we'll put the team together and determine who the leader of that team will be. And when they go over, they will also be working with our ambassador, Ambassador Wendy Chamberlain, who's been doing such a great job over there in the last 4 days. Those are the direct quotes from Secretary of State Colin Powell. And then Wolf Blitzer asked the Secretary of State about Pakistan's request to the United States that if, in fact, there is a joint military campaign and the target is Afghanistan and Pakistan's complicity is publicly known, that India and the Israeli government not participate. Wolf Blitzer asked the Secretary of State about that. He said, well, we'll see what their position is. We'll talk to them. And right now, you know, we are not planning. We don't have a multinational force going anywhere yet. And so we understand the sensitivities that would be involved in anything that might involve India or Israel. So clearly the United States stepping very gingerly around Pakistani concerns, trying to work with them as best they can to maintain a sharp and well-defined coalition with them. Shihab?
Major, it was pretty clear, though, from that interview with Foreign Minister Sattar that he's very keen to frame the events, the coalition, and what might be about to happen in terms of the United Nations resolutions. And indeed, if the United States, under international law, is considering any military retaliation, it should theoretically go through the UN Security Council. Surely that will preserve the international coalition and give the Arab world and other nations more peace of mind, as opposed to any kind of unilateral action. And yet we haven't had any mention of the United Nations being consulted at all as yet, or the Security Council being convened.
Well, no, the Foreign Minister mentioned the Security Council resolution passed on Tuesday, which was an overall condemnation of the terrorist attacks on New York and Virginia and the downing of the crash of the plane in Pennsylvania, all related to the various terrorist attacks. And yes, we would be seeing if, in fact, the UN Security Council were involved and there were an umbrella resolution passed, we would see the exact same type of situation that happened in the Gulf War. That was a cohesive, a glue, if you will, that kept the coalition together and gave many, particularly moderate Arab countries and those who were less eager to jump in on the coalition against Iraq, diplomatic cover within their own countries, saying this is not about common cause with the United States, but it is about common cause with the United Nations. It's so much easier for countries in these regions to do that because there is much less internal hostility to the United Nations, because oftentimes the United Nations acts on their behalf in confronting the Western world about issues of economics, human rights, and other matters. So the UN Security Council, probably in the next few days, we will see an effort built there to provide some overall authorization. The President's administration has made it clear the coalition will be broad, it will be sustained. Probably one of the difficulties so far is providing the exact wording for something the UN Security Council would in fact endorse, because, as the administration has pointed out so regularly, this will be a long-running and not necessarily nation-specific or individual-specific campaign. So how do you write something the entire United Nations Security Council can endorse that would be that nebulous? That's one of the challenges ahead.
Major Garrett, thank you very much for your analysis. And for our viewers in the United States, we now return you to CNN.
All right, thank you very much, Jeb. I'm Jack Cafferty. It's coming up on 1:59 in the morning. Quickly, before we wind this up, Mansour, what did we hear from the foreign minister?
Well, you heard a lot of diplomatic speak, if you will. Here's what the reality is. General Musharraf has to deal with three constituencies. The first one is his Islamic hardliners within the army and the intelligence apparatus who support the Taliban and have supported them for a long time. The second are the religious zealots on the streets. The third are the hardliners in